Oops. Welcome to A Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. Today we're going to be looking at a human rights story, just a quick one. This is a breaking story, happened September 29th, which is today. And it's human rights looking at environmental rights. And we'll look at a couple of different mechanisms here that have been used and thinking through this concept of human rights and companies. Our rivers are poisoned. Residents raise Rio Tinto human rights claim. More than 150 Bougainville residents are petitioning the Australian government to investigate Rio Tinto, so Rio Tinto is a massive miner, over claims its failure to clean up millions of tonnes of waste from its former copper mine on the island has caused severe environmental damage and human rights violations. The complaint sent to the Anglo-Australian miner and the Federal Treasury Department this week says the pollution left behind from Bougainville's Panguna mine that Rio Tinto ran for decades has poisoned local water sources and put the community's lives and livelihoods at risk. Thea Nyla, I think that's her name, Roka Matbob, a traditional landowner, that's her there, who has recently been elected to the Bougainville Parliament, said residents were living with the impacts of Panguna every day. She said Rio Tinto had left them with no choice but to take the matter to the international stage. Our rivers are poisoned with copper, our homes get filled with dust from the tailing mounds, our kids get sick from the pollution, she said. Every time it rains, more waste washes into the rivers, causing flooding for villages further downstream. Some communities now have to spend 2 hours a day walking just to get clean drinking water because their nearby creeks are clogged up with mine waste. So what's happening here? It seems like an easy story. You've got Rio Tinto, they've got a mine, they've obviously not looked after it well enough, and it's spewing pollution in and destroying the local community. Well, it actually gets a lot more complicated than that if we continue reading. The complaint, signed by 156 Bougainville residents, has been lodged with the Australian OECD contact point within the Treasury, which has the power to investigate complaints made against Australian companies operating overseas, issuing findings on whether they were in breach of their obligations under the OECD guidelines, and recommend action. So there's the process that you're talking about when it comes to Australia and incorporating human rights into domestic law. So remember, this is an international place, so this is how we deal with it. They go to the OECD contact point, and the Federal Treasury works out whether they've breached guidelines and recommend actions. Rio Tinto, which was forced to suspend operations at Panguna due to the civil war in 1989 and divested, means gave up, its interest in 2016, on Monday acknowledged the filing of the complaint by the Panguna communities and said it was ready to enter into discussions with them. Okay, so this is what's happened. You've got this Australian miner dealing and kind of working with the government, Bougainville, and then a civil war happens and they just leave. It's not safe. So this is their content. While it is our belief that from 1990 to 2016, no Rio Tinto personnel had access to the mine site due to ongoing security concerns, we are aware of the deterioration of mining infrastructure at the site and surrounding areas, and claims of resulting adverse environmental and social, including human rights, impacts, the spokesman said. So it seems like Rio Tinto is admitting the concept that their mine, because it's been sitting there for too long, the infrastructure is broken down. Rio Tinto's treatment of community stakeholders has been in the spotlight in recent months as it faces the ongoing fallout from its decision to blow up two 46,000-year-old Aboriginal rock shelters in Western Australia's Juukan Gorge. The disaster left the land's traditional owners devastated and eventually led to the resignations of Chief Executive Jean-Sébastien Jacques and two other senior executives. So there you go. That's a different issue altogether. That's one of the reasons why this is in the news. And that would certainly come into this question here. Probably that would be in breach of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. This question of why is a company doing that? And very much it was seen, might be a nice case study to look at in human rights for a company that is very much in breach of cultural rights in some people's opinion. Lawyers from the Human Rights Law Centre, which filed the complaint on behalf of the Bougainville residents, said the actions at Juukan Gorge and at Bougainville revealed a total disconnect between Rio Tinto's rhetoric, between what they're saying, holding itself out as a global leader on human rights and the reality experienced by Indigenous communities impacted by its operations. If Rio Tinto is serious about learning lessons, it needs to listen to communities and take responsibility for the human impacts of its activities, the group's legal director, Karen Adams, said. The outbreak of civil war in Bougainville led to Rio Tinto's majority-owned Bougainville Copper suspending the Panguna mine operations from 1989. The company has had no access to the site since then due to the conflict and ongoing security concerns. Rio Tinto cut ties with Bougainville Copper in 2016, gifting its 53% stake to the Papua New Guinea and autonomous Bougainville government. Bougainville residents and human rights advocates have been seeking commitments from Rio Tinto to contribute to an independent fund to address the immediate health and safety dangers caused by the mine and assist with the long-term cleanup and rehabilitation. These are not problems we can fix with our bare hands, Ms. Matbob said. We urgently need Rio Tinto to do what's right and deal with the disaster they left. Okay, so here's this question here. How culpable is a miner that has been working overseas and is no longer able to access a site because of civil war? But literally, you can't have people, working in a mine during a civil war. And yet the mine that they set up and that they were in charge of and they were responsible for has sat there, and the infrastructure, the walls, the different safety measures they've got, they have all deteriorated to the point where they've started polluting the surrounding areas and endangering the lives of local inhabitants. So it's this question here of, how effective measures, non-legal and legal, in protecting human rights here. So we'll have a look at that and see what this group here, the Treasury Department and the OECD Contact Point Group, what they do with this complaint. We'll have a think about this question of compliance and non-compliance in relation to human rights and in relation to environmental rights, and this question of, how well is Australia going to think through the way that non-government organisations work? We've obviously got the media working here, because the media is reporting on it, and they've gone and they've got statements from Ms. Matbob and from Rio Tinto, etc., and I'm bringing your attention to it. So it's an interesting issue to think about, and some of the themes there are really important, and it's a different thing to think about. We don't often think about environmental rights, and this question surely is a question that needs to be thought about, as very often mines are set up in places where we have poor Indigenous communities, and they are the ones that are affected most when the mine goes bad.